From the Cosmologos Institute, a school of idealist philosophy, spirituality, and Hermetic wisdom. We present an episode from the series, Universal Symbolism in Sacred and Mystical Art. Jean Delville was one of the leading proponents of symbolist painting and idealist art in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Through his art and writings, he advocated for the expression of spiritual and philosophical ideas in the creative process. Like a number of symbolist artists and poets, his work was suffused with esoteric and mystical principles, as he was deeply influenced by Platonic thought and the Hermetic mysteries. His paintings reflect themes from Greek myth, the Western initiatory traditions, sacred mysteries, and mystical states of the soul. Above all, he extolled the pursuit of the ideal in art and in life. This idealist aspiration is expressed here in Delville's painting. The artwork shows the epic poet Dante, a Christian mystic who was also influenced by the Platonic philosophical tradition. It was the figure of Dante's beloved Beatrice who embodied the principles of ideal love and divine wisdom. And it was Beatrice who, like those ancient virgin goddesses of wisdom, Isis, Sophia, and Athena, led the poet into the heights of universal mind and cosmic spirit. It was to this same end that Jean Delville and his art aspired. This quote from the prominent symbolist poet and polemicist Jean Marais describes the motivations of the symbolist artist. Thus, in this art, neither scenes from nature, nor human actions, nor any other physical phenomena can be present in themselves. What we have instead are perceptible appearances designed to represent their esoteric affinities with primordial ideas. In other words, the symbolist artist attempts to express not simply an outer representation or a depiction of nature, which was the case with realist and impressionist painters, but to suggest the underlying spiritual essence or universal idea from which physical objects take their form. This way of seeing the world lies at the root of Platonic and other idealist philosophies. The belief that there is a larger, unchanging universal order from which humanity and this material world are derived. Thus, what the symbolist artist tries to express are outer appearances which represent our world's hidden linkages with universal or archetypal ideas. For example, in these two Delville paintings, we find the expression of a basic esoteric principle, that of the nature of creative spirit. To the left, we see depicted the fall of the first fire, the divine creative or spiritual force, through the demigod Prometheus. And to the right, in the painting, we see the aspiration of humanity to reascend via that same fire to its luminous primal source. Tsar Peladon was a novelist, art critic, and esotericist who was associated with the Martinist order and founded the Rosicrucian Ordre des Temple de la Rose-Croix. He drew together symbolist painters, poets, and musicians in a series of exhibitions under the name of the Salon Rose-Croix to promote spirituality, Hermeticism, and idealism in art. Delville had a close association with Peladon and his exhibitions, as reflected in this portrait that Delville created of the writer. In the Rose-Croix mission statement by Tsar Peladon, we hear echoes of Jean Marais' idealist credo. The Salon wishes to ruin realism, reform Latin taste, and create a school of idealist art. The order favors first the Catholic ideal and mysticism, legend, myth, allegory, the dream, the paraphrase of great poetry, and finally, all lyricism. Jean Delville was the leading exponent of the Belgian Idealist movement in art during the 1890s. During the next few years, he founded or contributed to various periodicals that espoused such principles. Delville also became allied with other symbolist artists who shared his mythic, spiritual, or esoteric ideals. We already referred to Peladon's Salon de la Rose-Croix, which Delville associated with for the first few years of its existence. Afterwards, he founded his own group called the Salon des Arts Idealistes in Brussels. In the 1890s, he joined the Theosophical Society, which became a major influence on his work. In 1900, he wrote the significant treatise entitled The New Mission of Art, a study of idealism in art. In 1914, he imposed a voluntary exile in London due to the First World War and founded a Masonic lodge there. The two images you see refer to this Freemasonic influence. On the right, we have a drawing of a Freemasonic emblem, which contains the compass and the square of the Freemasons, the builders of the temples, and within that, the third eye, which is associated with the Egyptian sun god Horus, among others. Even Christ made reference to this single eye of illumination when he said the light of the body is the eye. If thine eye be single, then thy whole body will be filled with light. On the left, we see Delville in his Freemasonic regalia, wearing the symbols and emblems of this Hermetic order. Another influential source for Delville was the author Edouard Cheret, who wrote the book The Great Initiates. This book told of a lineage of great spiritual figures throughout the ages who taught a similar mystical, cosmological, or philosophical truth. Often these mystical teachings were hidden behind metaphoric veils or esoteric symbols. Once when in the Uffizi Library researching Neoplatonic philosophers, Cheret had a vision, stating, "As in a flash, I saw the light that flows from one mighty founder of religion to another." Thus, according to Cheret, Krishna, Hermes, Moses, Orpheus, Pythagoras, Plato, and Jesus, through them all moved the impulse of the eternal Word. To be in harmony with them is to hear the Word, which was in the beginning. As we will see, this notion of a perennial wisdom that illuminates the ages was not new and was an important part of the Renaissance philosopher Marsilio Ficino's thinking. Unlike Ficino, in Cheret's case, there were also spiritual luminaries from the East, such as Krishna, who must be included on the list. Such an Eastern influence is attributable to the prominence of Theosophy and Eastern sacred texts in the 19th century, which affected Delville, as well as the thought of philosophers such as Emerson and Schopenhauer. In his quote, Cheret makes prominent mention of the eternal Word, when he speaks of the Word as a singular theme, which threads through all of these sacred mysteries. He is referring to that notion of the Greek logos, or greater order and pattern of creation, from which everything is derived. Before you are three depictions of these illuminated masters. On the right is Moses, transmitting the tenfold law of the commandments. To the left is Delville's painting, Jesus Christ glorified. Last is Orpheus, who met his death at the hands of the Maenads, those female followers of the god Dionysos, who tore the divine singer into pieces. Yet his head survived, and, along with his lyre, floated across the sea until landing on the Isle of Lesbos, where a shrine was founded in his name. There the spirit of Orpheus continued to provide wisdom and prophecy for spiritual seekers. Such a belief in a continuous lineage of spiritual wisdom was central to the Platonic school of Marsilio Ficino in 15th century Florence, and embraced by many Renaissance humanists and even churchmen of the time. This procession of ancient theology, or Priscotheologia, was described by Ficino. Hermes Trismegistus is called the first author of theology. He was succeeded by Orpheus, who was succeeded in theology by Pythagoras, whose disciple was Philolaus, the teacher of our divine Plato. Hence there is one ancient theology, taking its origin in Mercurius and culminating in the divine Plato. On the left we have Delville's depiction of Orpheus and his descent into the underworld in order to retrieve his lost soul in the form of his beloved Eurydice. This episode was essential to an understanding of the Orphic mysteries and humanity's journey of the soul. Furthermore, Ficino's declaration that the purpose of philosophy is an ascent of the mind from the lowest regions to the highest, and from darkness to light, became a motif that was important to Delville's work. It was expressed in the painting on the right, entitled The Angel of Splendor, where the angelic spirit of higher mind and mystic vision lifts man from the miasma of the material world. We here have the founder of Theosophy, Helena Blavatsky's description of the symbolic or allegorical method of all the sacred mysteries. Judaism, Gnosticism, Christianity, and even Christian Masonry have all been erected on identical cosmic myths, symbols, and allegories, whose full comprehension is possible only to those who have inherited the key from their inventors. Such a mythic and analogical approach was embraced by Delville, who was influenced by theosophical and Hermetic thought in the creation of his art. In his book, The New Mission of Art, Delville proclaimed the need for idealism in art. The artist, in order to evolve, will have to extend the study of nature to the great laws of cosmic ideas. That knowledge will urge him to penetrate the mystery and hidden meaning in the forms of the visible word. The object of art, then, is to cause man to perceive the essential reality of things. Delville wished to move beyond the contemporary artistic aims of realism and impressionism, which focus primarily upon the outer appearance of things, to a greater vision that sought to express the universal ideas and mystical truths that form the basis of all physical phenomena. This idealist understanding of the world lay at the root of the sacred mysteries of Pythagoras, Orpheus, and Plato. It is such a universal vision of the world, rooted in the cosmic order of the Logos or Word, which is embodied in the figure of the Holy Grail. For it is this Logos Word Grail which is the essential reality that underlies all things. In the painting on the right, we see the flame of angelic consciousness holding up this holy Logos or Grail in the elevated space of a temple or cathedral. Similarly, the human figure in the left-hand painting is lifted to divine heights by the winged steed Pegasus, who represents the transformative power of luminous soul. Indeed, it is the celestial song of Orpheus and Pythagoras, as symbolized by the lyre and representing the harmonious or quasi-mathematical order of the universe, which may lead the soul in ascent to its divine origin. In Delville's painting of the Wheel of Fortune, we see masses of humanity subject to the incessant changes and misfortunes to be found in the material world. It should be noted that this artwork was created in 1940, in the midst of the Second World War. Thus, the image also refers to the vast numbers of humanity that have been crushed by the cruel machine of war. It shows how those that cling to the caprices of merciless fortune, as symbolized by the looming figure who holds the human skull, may fall prey to the deadly vicissitudes of fate. The painting reflects the thought of the 6th century Platonist Boethius, who in his book, The Consolation of Philosophy, wrote of the ascendancy of the philosophical life and its adherence to the unchanging eternal ideas, over man's enslavement to the false tide of illusion, competitiveness, and materialistic obsession. In Boethius' work, it is the divine goddess of wisdom, philosophy, who comes to him when he has been falsely imprisoned and reveals to him the greater truths of the ideal or philosophical life over the rule of fortune. This archetype has also been expressed in the major arcana tarot card, the Wheel of Fortune. Delville extends such idealist principles to the aesthetic sphere when he addresses the fate of the materialist artist. A truth that modern critics, and even the majority of artists, fail to understand is that art is the incarnation of the idea, of the word, under the forms of nature. It is because they do not understand this definition that they wallow in their artistic materialism that limits life to the objective world. The thought of Plato was crucial to the creative work of Delville, just as Plato was the seminal figure in the progression of idealist thought throughout the centuries of Western civilization. Such an idealist orientation is expressed in the following quotes from Delville's artistic and philosophical manifesto, The New Mission of Art. Plato has clearly said that the duty of the soul is to conceive the universal. Truly, therefore, the mission of all the arts consists in the representation of ideas. The idealist artist, generally speaking, and genius in particular, are in touch with the mental plane, the superior subjective plane. I dream of seeing the standpoint of artists raised, and of seeing them return once and for all to the evolution of the human ideal, so that their individual knowledge of the soul, becoming more luminous, may glow with the purer luster in their works. Delville's painting captures that greater aspiration of man and woman to set their sights on the unchanging powers and eternal ideas that lie beyond the stars. In his painting, The School of Plato, Delville pays homage to the great master of idealist philosophy. In an interesting allusion, the central figure of Plato is made to resemble the traditional depiction of Jesus Christ as found in Western art. Here it is suggested that what Jesus has offered humanity in the religious and moral realm, Plato has provided in the philosophical and spiritual sphere. Both have offered through their esoteric teachings the keys to spiritual regeneration and mystical union. Surrounding the central Christ-like figure are 12 of the philosopher's followers, which are further suggestive of Jesus' 12 disciples. The disciples here, however, have a rather effeminate and affectionate appearance. The common ground between the depictions of Plato as Jesus and that of his disciples is the principle of the androgyne, or the merger of the feminine and the masculine qualities into a unified whole. We find this mystical principle of the wedding of opposites, or the divine marriage, expressed in the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas. Here Jesus proclaims, when you make the two into one, and when you make the inner like the outer, and the outer like the inner, and the upper like the lower, and when you make male and female into a single one, so that the male will not be male, nor the female be female, then you will enter the kingdom of heaven. The figure of Jesus as the androgyne may be understood in terms of Christ being an embodiment of the solar archetype. Such a divine intermediary or solar goddess hero, be he the Greek Hermes, the Egyptian Horus, or the Christ, unites the polarities of up and down and of sky and earth, which is to say the masculine and feminine principles. The gestures of the god Hermes, as well as the magician in the tarot card, signify this joining of the upper and lower spheres by the initiatory master or spiritual adept. Delville's Plato uses similar arm gestures to indicate his identity as a unifying divine messenger. Plato's idealist doctrine, as indicated by his allegiance to the divine mother of wisdom philosophy, as well as his mystical teachings, provide the framework for attaining spiritual transformation. We find this androgynous principle expressed in various mythic and mystical traditions, such as in the Hindu god Shiva Ardhanarishvara, who in the painting on the left is expressed in its dual male and female form, combining the god Shiva with his consort, the goddess Shakti. This androgynous principle is also found in Horus, the Egyptian god of the sun, represented by the golden winged sphere with its twofold serpents. Such an androgynous nature is also found in the dual figure of the rebus, who symbolizes the culmination of the alchemical magnum opus, that great work of spiritual transmutation. Such an androgynous nature is generally characteristic of the third universal logoic principle, as expressed in Christ of the divine Father, Holy Ghost, and Son Trinity, or as expressed in Shiva Ardhanarishvara of the Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva triad. Christ and Shiva thus correspond to the third element of air, which is to say the product or union of the fiery masculine and the watery feminine principles. Delville's tableau also addresses another aspect of the androgynous principle through the figures of the 12 disciples. They refer to the principle of the hermaphrodite or the androgyne, as described in Plato's dialogue, the Symposium. The dialogue discusses the nature of love, be it of divine, noble, or base love, or of sex, desire, and homosexuality. The Symposium dialogue provides an anthropology to explain the sources of attraction between men and women, based upon the idea of the hermaphrodite. While many consider that this episode is intended to be comical or satirical in nature, it veils a deeper principle of the original androgynous nature of humanity. Such an understanding of the human soul, or the original human archetype, has been expressed in the figure of the Kabbalistic Adam Kadmon, or the first ideal human, and in the Jesus Yeshua of Martinist and Gnostic mysticism. The Symposium dialogue describes how there were originally three sexes, the all-male, the all-female, and the androgynous or hermaphrodite, who is half male, half female. Zeus eventually divided the androgynes, which became the cause for the human love impulse and the desire to reunite with one's lost divided half. Originally, there were also twofold men and twofold women of the same sex, which provided a means of explaining the homosexual urge. The elevated state of androgyny, or the wedding of opposites, has been used to describe our original spiritual nature. This synthesis of male and female qualities was also identified in the work of the esoteric author Edouard Schuré when he said, "The perfect fusion of masculine and feminine constitutes the very essence and mystery of divinity." Delville's painting, The Love of Souls, depicts this ideal union of male and female, and the desire of man and woman to find their perfect soulmate, be it in the physical or spiritual sphere. In Delville's multi-layered painting, we find other symbolic references to esoteric principles. The gestures of the disciples provide a cosmological mapping of the journey of the soul. The figure's postures and hand gestures indicate certain esoteric principles. There is basically an evolutionary progression from the left or material side to the right or immaterial side. It also suggests the path of the soul as it progresses through human lifetimes, entering the body and later leaving the body upon death to return to the immaterial, ideal, or spiritual sphere. In the left tree sits a peacock who is sacred to the goddess Juno and represents the twofold feminine or material principle. The bird's whiteness refers to the feminine lunar or virgin goddess principle, as found in Isis or Athena. The two male figures standing beneath the peacock form a downward pointing triangle with their arms in order to indicate the involutionary or materialization principle. In Hermetic symbology, this idea is represented by the downward pointing triangle, be it aquamarine for the watery principle or green for the earthen principle. The standing male figure on the far right holds his arms in the shape of an upward triangle, symbolizing the first fiery, evolutionary, or immaterial principle. The upward red triangle also represents the fiery or energy principle in alchemy and the Hindu tattvas. At the center of the painting sits the Christos, or Platonic principle, which, like Hermes and Mercury, is equated with the third logoic idea of mind or thought, which balances the male and female forces. This aerial principle is represented by the blue oval, like the Vayu Tattva in Sakya Hinduism. This harmonizing principle is associated with the spinal shaft in Kundalini Yoga and the middle pillar in the Kabbalistic tree of life. Appropriately, a tree trunk, like a central pillar, arises from the figure of Plato. It is also fitting that the tree is a wisteria, whose fragrant purple blossoms traditionally symbolize the Christ-like Platonic qualities of love, bliss, grace, and a new life. Such innocent, pure solar qualities may also be found in the figure of Parsifal, hero of the Holy Grail, as depicted here by Delville. We see in Parsifal the Christ-like attributes of an inflamed heart, as well as the crown of the sun that he wears on his head. Another rendering of the solar principle was expressed by Delville in his illustration for the music of Prometheus, created by the Russian symbolist composer Alexander Scriabin. Scriabin was also influenced by Idealist and Hermetic principles, and like Delville's works, his creations are filled with esoteric symbolism. Accordingly, Delville uses the image of the lyre, which was associated with the Greek solar figures Apollo and Orpheus. Delville was a gifted poet, whose writings were inspired by the spirit of mysticism and the sacred mysteries, as indicated by the title of some of his poems, such as Shudder of the Sphinx, Prayer of a Magician, and The Holy Book. In his poem Magica, Delville invokes the visionary spirit of the ancient Delphic mysteries. The poem is addressed to the Delphic oracle, known as the Pythoness, who provided prophecy for those men and women seeking the wisdom of the gods. In the poem Magica, Delville proclaims, "Behold the hour for your clairvoyant eyes to shine, intent Pythoness, inert in the silent heart of evening. Your spirit has departed, lost amidst the soul of the world, seeking the treasure, as your desire weaves its magic. The holy aromatic burns in bright vessels. For you, the world is a pure enchantment, where you hover, dazzled above the element." Before you are two Delville paintings, one a self-portrait of the artist, and the other a portrait of an esoteric friend, both of whom are portrayed in an expression of mystic reverie. Delphi was not the only ancient mystery school to be portrayed by Delville. On the left is the painting The Women of Eleusis, Delphi and Eleusis being the most renowned of the Greek mysteries. The other painting is entitled The Oracle of Dodona. Dodona is the oldest of the Hellenic oracles and is considered second in prestige only to the Delphic oracle. This painting, The School of Silence, refers to no particular mystery school, but instead addresses a crucial element of the initiatory process and the mystical experience, that being the sanctuary of silence. Silence, introversion, and introspection have long been critical components of the mystical discipline. Indeed, Pythagoras required his neophytes to take a 5-year vow of silence before they could advance to the higher degrees of initiation. As in the School of Athens, the figures in this painting provide gestures that indicate their symbolic significance. Again, on the left, the arms of the woman form a downward involutionary triangle. The woman on the right forms with her head and arms an upward pointing immaterial triangle. And the central figure, like Plato, holds one arm up and one down, thus connecting the heavens to the earth. In these paintings are represented those two covenants which are essential to the Bible: the Old Testament covenant of Moses and his 10 commandments, and on the right, the New Testament covenant of Jesus. According to various Christian theologians, the older Mosaic law was intended to expose sin, while Jesus' purpose was to defeat sin. On a macrocosmic level, it could be said that the authoritarian Old Testament covenant yielded to the milder and more merciful New Covenant of Jesus. The two Trinitarian gods, Jesus and Jehovah, represent those dual aspects of the archetypal masculine principle. The Old Testament figure of Jehovah embodies what I would term the alpha male archetype. For the patriarchal Jehovah is often full of bluster, threats, and inflexible control, mixed with moments of forgiving mercy. Jesus, on the other hand, is full of compassion and love, in accordance with his more androgynous nature, reflecting those empathetic, understanding qualities of the divine feminine nature. This more compassionate, what I term the omega male, comes closer to Plato's divine creator, as found in his Timaeus dialogue, who the philosopher simply called the good. It is interesting to note that these two qualities of patriarchal severity and the solar Christ's mercy are reflected in the upper Sephira, Geburah, and Hesed on the Kabbalistic tree of life. Here we find Jesus consoling lost and suffering souls, bringing them the promise of hope and salvation. On the right we find the epic poet and Christian mystic Dante Alighieri in divine rapture, led by the light of paradise and the celestial spirit of his beloved Beatrice. As indicated by this painting of the Hindu demigods, the Kumaras, Delville looked to the wisdom of the East as well as the West in his quest to express the eternal and the ideal. And so did John Delville ever reach for a realm that exists beyond the limits of physical measurement or simple intellectual understanding. He sought to fashion a world of limitless creativity and universal ideal. For he believed that it was the duty of the artist to raise man and woman to the wondrous heights of eternity. According to Delville, the artist has an almost divine power to create a new universe within. As the mystical painter and poet proclaimed, art is more divine than science. Science makes discoveries. Art creates. Astronomy, which numbers the stars, cannot add an atom to the universe. A universe by a poet can be evolved from an atom. Delville had an ultimate belief in the power of idealism and its capacity to lead the artist into the sphere of the mystical absolute. For as Delville declared, a work of idealism is that in which the three great worlds of life are brought into harmony: the natural, the human, the divine.